For my annual video in October, I love recommending stuff for the Halloween season. Last year, my criteria were things that I owned in my collection. For this year, I wanted to go over some of my favorite first-time horror watches. The first one I wanted to talk about is When a Stranger Calls Back from 1993. This is a sequel to the 1979 film When a Stranger Calls. That movie has one of the most famous first 20 minutes of any movie, which I still think is some of the greatest horror filmmaking. The rest of the movie doesn't quite live up to those first 20 minutes. With the sequel, though, the same director, Fred Walton, returns and builds upon certain things that the audience is expecting and changes them in new and interesting ways. The first 20 minutes of the movie, have almost the same short film vibe that the first one does. These first 20 minutes are amazing, and then the rest of the sequel lives up to those first 20 minutes. This movie is an amazing sequel and has some incredible use of negative space and framing. Walton will hold on areas of the frame for long stretches of time, and you, the viewer, start to realize that something has been there the entire time, which makes it even scarier. Towards the end, there is a character reveal that is one of the greatest uses of camera trickery I have ever seen. And what helps lift up the rest of the movie is the amazing performances by Carol Kane, Charles Durning, and Jill Skolin. If you've been hesitant on seeing this movie since it's a sequel, I would strongly recommend seeing it. Next, I wanted to recommend Blood Massacre from 1987. The movies of Don Dohler have eluded me for the longest time. I think it was me seeing clips from his film Night Beast and fearing that it would just be a slow slog. Time passed, and I got my hands on copies of The Alien Factor and Fiend, which tells the story of an alien ghost that resurrects the body of a music teacher, played wonderfully by Don Leifert, with every single line that he utters just oozes with contempt, annoyance, and menace. From that point on, it slowly transitions into almost a serial killer movie from the perspective of the killer. This movie was a great experience. Through Dohler's deadpan static shots, he's able to create a wonderfully creepy suburban horror tone akin to Blue Velvet's white picket fence opening, and then delve deep into the underbelly of the suburban horror. I was shocked that this came from Don Dohler, and it made me appreciate him as a director and what his capabilities are to bring to the movie, and especially the horror filmmaker that he was. Now this brings us to this movie, Blood Massacre. Coming in the wave of slasher movies of the 80s, this movie sees Dohler dealing with the genre mashup, and what I see as an extremely effective use of it. I personally think Dohler does it extremely well, and honest to God, shows some restraint when it comes to slowly introducing the horror. The premise is, a group of thieves rob a video store. Things go south, and the group end up taking hostage a girl they find driving on the road. They force her to take them back to her family and home, which just so happens to be a farmhouse. And I'll just stop right there. This is one of those classic movies where you have no idea where it's going to go next. It starts out as a weird character piece akin to Maniac, then shifts to a robbery movie, then Texas Chainsaw Massacre, then it turns into Rambo, but then it has one other trick that I will definitely not spoil. I would definitely recommend this movie in all of the movies by Don Dohler. Next is The Mangler from Tobe Hooper. I remember hearing about this movie for the longest time. There was something about the premise that turned me off from seeing it for a long time, and I have really wanted to dive into my blind spots in Tobe Hooper's filmography, and so that prompted me to see this for the first time. This movie is awesome. It's extremely brutal and very tense when it needs to be, especially with the scenes of people reaching towards the gigantic laundry press machine. The mythology of what exactly is happening goes a lot deeper than what I was expecting, and it was awesome seeing Ted Levine in the lead role of a movie who commits 100% to the material. Next, I wanted to recommend a movie similar in nature to Deliverance and Rituals, Trapped, from 1982. Once this movie gets going, it does not stop. It has a wonderfully stripped down premise of teens versus backwoods people. The villain, played brilliantly by Henry Silva, is motivated to go after this group of teens. They witness Silva's character and a couple other townsfolk murdering someone. What follows is a relentless chase film that is filled with action and horror, and quite possibly one of the greatest stunts I have ever seen, where a character dodges out of the way of a car ramming through a storefront. Silva's character is so evil in this movie, and he plays it perfectly. And it has a wonderful woodsy atmosphere that I think is perfect for this time of the year, especially if you're in the Midwest. If you love slow moving and atmospheric horror movies, then this next one is perfect. Shockwaves from 1977 kind of surprised me on so many levels. I talked about it on my July 2023 video and wanted to highlight it again here. It is such an effective mood piece from the synth score that really does a good job at selling the horror of the movie, paired with the amazing imagery. Ever since I saw it back in July, it has always stuck with me, and I like it even more now. I think for the Halloween season, this movie will stick with anyone that loves movies with droning, dreamlike atmosphere. And while I'm here with a movie that I mentioned previously, I wanted to go back and recommend again The Woman from 2011 and Baxter from 1989, both being very effective in what they set out to do. The standout of all three of these being Baxter. Now let's go down the bonkers realm with The Carrier from 1988. This movie has one of the most bizarre and original plots to any horror movie that I've seen in a long time. Taking place in the 1950s, a young man is attacked one night by a creature and injured. As a result of the injury, whoever the man touches burns to death. But it doesn't stop there. If the man touches an inanimate object, that object becomes inflicted with this curse too. And if somebody else touches that item, they burn to death as well. As the movie progresses, the entire town descends into chaos as they try to find the initial carrier. The town even splits up into two warring factions and uses the cursed items as weapons. Like I said, this movie is bizarre, but the execution of the entire movie is wonderful and almost gives off vibes of Gremlins, both versions of The Blob, The Mist, and Lady in White. I've heard nobody talk about this movie, and I think this may be a hidden gem for the lovers of bonkers movies. Next, I want to recommend a notorious movie from the Videos Nasty list, Axe from 1974. Similar in nature to Blood Massacre, where you have criminals coming to a country farm, stumbling into the horror. The first half, you're with this group of criminals, and it feels like a lost great 70s crime film, with the scene in a grocery store being the best scene in the entire movie. Once they arrive on the farm, it slowly switches gears and truly has some creepy, dread-inducing scenes. Don't go into this thinking it's a slasher. It's a very slow-moving thriller that leads up to a horror scenario. Now, let's go back to bonkers with The Seventh Curse. What a huge surprise this movie was. This movie is incredible. From the premise to the stunt work to the horror sequences, the creature effects, everything was just perfection. On top of all that, it's a fun ride throughout with an incredibly satisfying ending involving Chow Yun-fat. The best comparison I can make is if you took Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, jacked it up with maggots, wires, creatures, exploding body parts, and humor, you would have The Seventh Curse. Continuing down my path of crossing off Larry Cohen's filmography, A Return to Salem's Lot was a good surprise in Cohen's films. I do have to specify that I haven't seen the original Salem's Lot at the time of this recording. It's one that I've been meaning to get to for years, especially around Halloween. With this movie though, Michael Moriarty plays an anthropologist who is tasked by a town full of vampires to document them and their behaviors. From what I know of the original, this has very little to do with the first one. Viewing this as its own separate movie, this movie is a lot of fun, especially around this time of year. I love Moriarty's performance in this, but then in the third act, the best part of the movie comes in. The director, Sam Fuller, enters this movie and completely steals every scene he's in. He plays a Nazi hunter who switches from hunting Nazis to hunting vampires, and teams up with Michael Moriarty. And the movie itself switches gears into full-on horror comedy, and it completely nails the tone. Next, I have a not much talked about zombie movie from 1991, The Boneyard. With this movie, I did a very interesting experiment when it came to first seeing this movie. I read the script before seeing this movie, and reading the script really zeroed in on how well this movie is written. James Cummins, who wrote and directed this movie, does an amazing job with building these characters who you really want to see make it out of this horrible situation. Taking place almost entirely on a dark night in a morgue, Deborah Rose plays Allie Cates, who is incredible in this movie, and her performance paired with the strong writing makes for some truly scary and also very sad sequences with her character. It's been a long time since I've seen a movie balance horror, comedy, and genuine drama so well. Next to all that, you have the other great performance in this movie, Phyllis Diller, who plays, I kid you not, a character named Mrs. Poopenplatz. This all leads to one of the greatest final acts of monster mayhem that these eyes have ever seen. Now let's transition to a classic film from the 30s that I have never seen but blew me away and I think is one of the best films of the 1930s, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The techniques that Ruben Mamoulian uses throughout the movie are so incredible to this day. Everyone knows about the amazing transformation sequence that is done through lighting, but the thing that impressed me about it was the fact that the signature scene is not the only time they do it. They do it multiple times at different locations, and they all look absolutely amazing. Not to mention that there are multiple first-person sequences, even opening with a 5-minute first-person sequence. This whole thing just blew me away, and I have not stopped thinking about it. Frederick March gives such an incredible performance, and especially Miriam Hopkins, whose character brings so much weight to the story. If you haven't seen this is up there with some of the most impactful horror movies of the 1930s. To close out this video, I wanted to recommend a movie that scared me, but not just scared me. This movie that I'm about to recommend scared and unsettled me for literal days after I saw it, and I honestly cannot remember the last time a horror movie scared me this much. That movie is Horror in the High Desert from 2021. This is a movie done in the style of a fake documentary with found footage aspects, kind of like Lake Mungo, which I also thought was incredibly scary. The buildup of the first two acts are interviews with people on what happened to an outdoor vlogger. It's very straightforward, where we get to learn about him and what he does, his personality, and why he likes going out into the wilderness alone. And through these interviews, we learn that he found this cabin in the high desert. He is scared off from it and makes a vlog about the cabin for his followers, who then proceed to bully him into going back to the cabin's location to get video evidence of whatever he experienced there. He ends up going to the cabin and is not heard from again. After his disappearance, the interviewers say that they found SD cards while also finding some very disturbing things along with the cards. The last 20 minutes of the movie consist of the footage found on the SD cards, and these 20 minutes make the movie. They are some of the scariest 20 minutes I have ever seen. Just thinking about it right now, honest to God, sends chills like all along my arm, especially this hymn that you hear throughout the duration of the 20 minutes. I know that people have sometimes been mixed when it comes to this movie, but for me, it worked so well. The director Dutch Merrick crafted one of the scariest movies that I've ever seen. Now all I have to do is see the sequel. And that's all my recommendations for Halloween. Thanks for watching!